Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship. And today we're going to talk about love in action. And what the heck does that mean, right? We all love to be in love. We all love the juiciness of that feeling of I'm more when I'm in the presence of this other person than I feel like when I'm on my own because they see all my potential and acknowledge me in a way that maybe I don't acknowledge myself. We love that stuff. But studies show that lasts maybe 2 to 3 years. So, and then we got to rely on love in a different way, and that's love in action. And we're going to talk today with Greg Smalley, who is vice president of marriage, at Focus on the Family. Marriage at Focus on the Family. He's a vice president of marriage at Focus on the Family. I'll say that till I get it right. And Greg and I just met. He's a great guy, and like he has this amazing partnership with his wife. They work together, and you know that when you work with your husband or wife, love in action becomes really vital. So, Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I love being with you.
Yeah, I'm loving it so much too. And I love your background, by the way. It's like this is a true Colorado background. I want to come. Can I just come visit you? It's just snow. Let's go ski, or maybe we can do some fly fishing.
Exactly.
Yeah. The question I ask everybody on the front end is, how did your heart lead you into this work?
Yeah, probably the story that comes to mind is my wife and I, we've been married 30 years. So Aaron and I had moved into a new neighborhood. We have 4 kids. We got to know our neighbors, found out this was a single mom raising her 4 kids. So this family had just gone through a really, really hard divorce. And so, as you can imagine, tough on the kids, especially though this one, the youngest daughter, I'll just call her Sarah. She was about 5, same age as my oldest daughter.
That's Sarah Smith,
Yeah.
or is it Sarah Jones?
Yeah, let's go with Sarah Smith.
Yeah.
So this one day, my wife was gone, which was good. I love my wife, but when I really want to watch a football game, it's awesome to have her gone. No looks, no to-do lists. So I'm just watching this football game. My daughter Taylor is playing with Sarah. So these are 5-year-olds. Well, upstairs, all of a sudden I can hear this argument break out. So these two little 5-year-old girls screaming at each other. I can sort of hear one going, yes, they will. The other going, no, they won't. I'm just hoping that this resolves itself so I don't actually have to get up and miss any of the game. But I wasn't that lucky. Kind of this conflict spills down right to my chair. So now I've got these two little 5-year-old girls screaming at each other. So I'm like, what guys, what are you fighting about? And that's when Taylor, my daughter, says, Daddy, Sarah says that you and mom are going to get a divorce.
Mm,
I was like, man, that's the last thing I thought 5-year-old girls would be fighting and arguing about.
that's definitely Sarah Smith, by the way.
Yeah,
I know
exactly.
that kid.
So so I kind of picked him up, brought him into my lap and said, listen, guys, I don't want to referee your argument, but I said, Sarah, honey, Taylor's right. Her mom and I, we're not going to get divorced. And that means that I have to learn to be a good husband, a good father. And I start to ramble on about something. Well, my daughter kind of is this show of victory kind of goes, and it just runs off.
Ever graceful, our children.
Exactly. Yeah. And so Sarah is just kind of still sitting with me. And so I'm kind of going, all right, go find Taylor. And instead she kind of just nestled back and ended up watching that entire football game with me.
Oh my goodness.
And at the end, she gets up and I said, hey, Sarah, Taylor's probably missing you. Why don't you go find her? So she gets up, she starts to walk away and stops and kind of slowly turns around and kind of looking at the floor, not looking at me. And she goes, would it be okay if maybe next weekend I come back over and you and me, we can watch another football game together? She goes,
Oh,
I can pretend that you're my daddy
oh, you're
because
breaking
my
my heart.
daddy, I know. She goes, my daddy left and I know it's my fault.
Oh no.
What do you say to that? Because so deep in this little girl's hearts was this thought, this lie that somehow her dad left because it was her fault. And I picked her up and I just held her and I told her, no, that's not true. And I know your dad loves you and he's thinking about you. But I think from that, one of the things I learned is that a brain can't ever convince a heart of anything. And
Mm.
deep in this little girl's heart, she believed that something was wrong with her, defective, something that caused her dad to leave. And that was just an experience that I'll never forget. And that, I think, deep within my heart, to your question, just rose up this passion to help couples. Man, I don't want to see little Sarah's go through that. And
You
so I
know,
want to do anything I can do to help that.
I totally get that. I started out as a divorce coach.
Oh, wow.
I made this big life transition, went into coach. I had masters in social work, and like, so I had experience working with people, but I was like, all right, I'm going to coach people in divorce. And that felt about, 6 inches wide.
Yeah.
And one of the first discoveries was that for people who are getting divorced to co-parent together, set from
Yeah.
separate domiciles,
Yeah.
did all the same tools
Mhm.
that a couple needs
That's right.
in order to have a happy marriage. It's the
Yeah.
same tools, just the
Totally.
intention and the focus is different. And so I got into couples work because I was like, man, if I can help people not get to this, if I can give them the tools they need to have it work. The other part was that 9 times out of 10, the couples get divorced because they don't have the tools. They
Right.
don't have the tools.
Right.
Like, just nobody's told them what the tools are. So if I can give them the tools, maybe I can help people stay together and not,
Right.
accidentally break those little hearts.
Yeah.
And I tell people all the time who I work with that who are getting divorced that the child always believes they're responsible. It's completely irrational,
Right.
and that all their conversations need to be framed around that with their
Yep.
children. Always, and the parents never believe me. Why would they think that? It's totally
Right.
irrational. It's like, look, this is a child.
Right.
Look, freaking adults are irrational. Why would
Right.
children be any different?
Right. Well, and they feel out of control, and to try to gain control, then if they can make it about them, then maybe there's something that they can
Yep.
do about it,
Yeah, if
and
I get better grades, if I
something. If I
whatever,
behave.
or if
Yeah.
I act out and maybe, if I do something bad, maybe they'll focus on me and not each other. Like the kids do they have all kinds of, and it's not like they're sitting there thinking about it. It's these,
Right.
they have unconscious strategies that are
Right.
being triggered by this feeling of, oh my God, I'm
Right.
tearing my parents apart.
Right.
Yeah,
All
it's
based off
so
of fear.
painful, so
Yep.
painful. All right, I totally get it. Why you do what you do. And I think that it's not just, well, one of the tools that a lot of couples are missing is this transition from, in love. This is so amazing. Speaking there, when you're in love, you're literally throwing all 5 love languages at each other all the time. And then life gets real. Maybe you have children, you get married and have children, and you start to have your individual lives back again, and maybe you're down to 1 or 2 love languages, and it happens usually not to be the one that the other person speaks.
Yeah.
So and then you're getting mad at each other, and you're going, what happened here? Where is the love? And that's kind of how we get into this topic of love in action. So Greg, what is love in action?
Yeah. I remember about 7 years into my own marriage, I had just written my very first books. I've written 20 books on marriage. Very
Wow,
first one
very impressive.
called The Marriage You've Always Dreamed of. So as that's coming out, my wife comes to me in big tears. We got to talk. She ends up just saying, Greg, I love you. I'm committed to you, but I feel like we're nothing more than married roommates. She goes, I
Mm,
feel so disconnected
mm,
from you. And what she didn't say, but I know that she was thinking, is that this, what we have, is far from the marriage that I've always dreamed of. And that was for me a real wake up call, because to your point, we get to the altar, we're in love, we get busy, a lot going on, kids, work, hobbies, whatever, fill in the blank. And what happens is that as Aaron and I started to drift apart, as we started to disconnect, not because we wanted to do that, just life happens. What happened is that at some point Aaron started to believe that we just had fallen out of love.
mm-hmm,
And I would say that's probably one of the biggest myths about love that I run into, is that when someone says, I just don't love him anymore, I just don't love her, we've fallen out of love, where's the love, how do we rekindle the love? The myth is somehow that you and I generate love. Love doesn't come from us. what happens in those situations when I don't feel love towards someone, it's because my heart is totally shut down and
Hmm.
probably hardened. And
Yeah.
that's what was going on in my marriage, that simply my heart, my wife's heart, it shut down over time. You know, you throw in conflict, you throw in disconnection, and our hearts were totally closed to each other, which we didn't feel the love. So we thought the problem is we just don't love each other anymore. The reality was that our hearts were closed, and a heart will always close when it doesn't feel safe. So the busier we got, the more disconnected we got, the worse our conflict became, the more unsafe we felt inside of our marriage. Our hearts just automatically closed. You know, those little tiny roly-poly bugs, you know, that
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
flick them and they roll right up.
Yep. Yep.
Tell me, that's our heart. When those little bugs don't feel safe, they instantly close up in this ball.
Hmm.
You can't pry that thing open. You try to rip that little bug back open, you kill it.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's the same thing with our heart. When our heart closes, I can't just make my heart, my wife's heart, just open to me.
Well, and
But
there's a lot in that. I'm sorry, you were
yeah,
going to say, but.
well, I was going to say, but when we feel safe with each other, our heart naturally opens
Mm,
and intimacy just happens. And so
yeah.
people try to figure out all these ways to create connection and intimacy. And I'm telling you, that's doing it the harder way, the easier way that I've found in marriage and relationships. Why don't we focus on safety? Because when
Hmm.
my wife feels safe, when my kids feel safe, when my friends feel safe, their hearts are going to open. And I'm telling you, we will connect.
Absolutely. And just for the listeners, I was saying there's a lot in that. For the listeners, I want you to know that it's actually, sadly, perhaps, normal and natural to wake up one day and go, how did I end up having a roommate? That, like, it's super,
Right.
super common. And it's because we're never given the lesson that there's there's you, there's me, and there's us.
Yeah.
And when we're in that in love state, we're all about us. And then when things sort of become more normalized, it becomes you and me again. And we forget to keep nurturing and feeding, maintaining the safety for the relationship.
Right.
So everyone that I've talked to, happily married or unhappily married, has passed through this phase at one time or another. And the second thing is, I think a lot of people confuse in love with loving each other. And in love is statistically proven to last on average 2 to 3 years.
Right. That
Nobody
honeymoon phase. Yeah.
nobody stays in that euphoric, you can't. Like, I remember when I was in love, falling asleep on the phone with the woman I was in love with, my current wife. When we were, dad would fall asleep, drooling on the receiver, and her saying, "Are you there? Oh yeah, honey, I love you." And I was sleeping 4 hours a night, and you can't sustain that forever. You can't sustain sleeping 4 hours a night. You can't sustain giving up your work hours, and everybody your work supports you. And, oh my God, he's in love. It's so cute. Give him a break. Like, everyone loves that. Like, the universe
Yeah.
supports that, but there's a limit. You
Yeah.
can't do that for more than a certain amount of time without the
Right.
ecology of the rest of your life
Right.
starting to collapse. And we need to develop as individuals as well as a couple. And
Yep.
so inevitably it's going to wear off, the in love. And that's when we need to lean into being loving without necessarily being in that constant euphoric
Right.
state.
Right. And that's when I would argue that love in action then is first and foremost going to be created because I'm focusing on creating safety in my marriage. I want my marriage, and this is true with my kids, with friends. I want those relationships to feel like the safest place on earth. But I'm telling you, no one teaches us how do I really create and build safety? But I tell you, when we do, hearts naturally open,
Mm-hmm.
and that connection is going to happen. But it's never going to happen if people don't feel safe
So
with each other.
let's talk situationally. We get people from in all stages of a relationship who listen to the podcast. Well, let's say there's a couple, maybe they've just discovered that they're kind of having parallel lives or roommates or whatever you want to call it. Or maybe there's a couple that's got some conflict going on. Usually in that situation, it's both. Or
Yeah.
the third possible scenario is they're avoiding conflict. They're
Yeah.
walking on eggshells all the time. And what we know, you and I know, as people who are in successful marriages, is you kind of have to have
Right.
resolution of difference, I'm going to call it, because conflict has such a heavy burden on it for people
Right.
emotionally. There has to be resolution of difference. Everything new comes out of resolution of difference.
Yeah.
Everything new comes out of resolution of difference. So there
Right.
needs to be some level of conflict, just not that destructive, shredding each other kind of conflict that goes nowhere. There
Yeah.
needs to be some expression of difference. So if we're walking on eggshells and dancing around it, we're not growing.
Right.
And if we're engaged in negative conflict, we're actively tearing each other down instead of growing. So let's say you're in one of these states. What does love in action start to look like? How do you make it safe enough in these situations?
Yeah, I think safety begins because we recognize our spouse or this other person, their true value. When we have a lot of conflict, when we're disconnected, I tell you, the first thing that goes is that I lose sight of how valuable my wife is.
Mm,
And think about it, I'm not going to pursue what I don't value. My where your treasure is, so what you value, there will your heart be also.
hmm.
So if I'm going to try
I've,
to
I've heard that before.
yeah, if I'm going to try to deal with and manage conflict better, or if I really want to reconnect with my wife, I'm telling you, it's going to happen because I first have to make sure, am I cherishing her? Do I really recognize her value? The way I love to describe this is that I want to see her as 110 carat diamond. If you think about a big old honking diamond, the unique way that diamond is cut to reflect the brilliance of light, and that those cuts all represent my wife's uniqueness, her differences. My wife is an extrovert and she loves people. I'm an introvert. I hate people. I always joke and go,
You
you
don't
know,
strike me as much of a people hater, but I get your
yeah,
drift.
yeah.
I get
So
your drift. As an introvert, it's not always comfortable for you to be with me.
exactly. So I always tell people I only have friends because my wife has set me up on play dates with other men. And so
Could,
just
could
to
I
let you
get
know.
could I get her to come help me with
Exactly.
that?
Yes, she would love to do that. But we're different that way. This week we have had a party at our house every single night. So
Wow.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and that's hard on me. But you know what? That's a beautiful part of who she is. And it's easy to lose sight of that value. It's easy to start to see those differences as the problem. Well, you talked about, divorce. The most often cited reason for divorce is irreconcilable differences. I'm
Mm.
telling you, I get it from a legal standpoint, but I'm telling you, what's not true about that is differences are never the problem.
Well, differences
Differences,
are never irreconcilable.
right?
We
Differences are
may
the
not want
beauty,
to reconcile them,
right?
but they are never irreconcilable.
Right. And probably it's that we don't know how to manage those differences. But I
Mm.
tell you, the differences are the beauty. That's the stuff that I've got to pay attention to because that's what makes my wife so valuable.
Another aspect of love and action that I listen in your sharing of that experience. All right, I hear that your wife has set up a bunch of parties because she
Yeah.
really likes to be with people, and you are being an introvert, are somewhat challenged by those situations,
Right.
and you love your wife. And so I'm going to imagine, just in my brief experience of you, that you entered into those parties and interact to the best of your ability in
Right.
a caring and participating way without being mad at her or
Right.
resentful, maybe uncomfortable,
Right.
but without redirecting that uncomfort at her. And that's we like to call that here exercising your love muscle.
Yeah,
It's
that's
like,
right.
all right, I know this is something that's important for her. It's not so comfortable for me, but I love her. And so I'm going to exercise my love muscle by demonstrating it, by participating in something that's really good for her and maybe a little uncomfortable for me.
Yeah, and it's true. And actually, you think about when we watch a football game or we watch sports. There's always someone holding up the big sign. John 3:16. Well, John 3:16 says God so loved the world that He gave His Son. So, in other
Mhm.
words, the love, I would define actually love. I think the best way to describe love in action is sacrifice.
I must be watching the wrong football games because I haven't seen that sign in a while. But I love that sign.
But and even, I mean, think about, there's another verse, 1 John 3:16. So it's almost the same thing. It says that this is how we know what love is, that Jesus gave his life, so we ought to do the same. In other words, it's all about sacrifice. No greater love than to lay down your life for a friend. And so when Aaron goes, hey, we're going to have a party, every night this week. Sorry, I know that's a lot. I have a choice. I can choose to love her, and love often shows up as sacrifice. Again, built that I get her value, and I get the difference. I get why she would like that. But then I have an opportunity to sacrifice. Sacrifice simply is when we give up something that is valuable to us for someone else that we consider to be valuable. So my time, my comfort, we paid for all these parties. So my finances, I mean, I have a choice that I can give that stuff up, which is sacrificing.
And I can tell you, though, from personal experience, that it's very possible to walk into something and sabotage it because
totally
you didn't want it, you didn't ask for it, you weren't ready for it.
Yeah,
and
I'm
I
great at
want to
that.
call out an important distinction. I think the reason why you are able to exercise love in that way is that you take the time to charge your own battery, number one,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
introverts cannot deal with social situations without charging their battery first. If you walked in there with your battery half charged, you might become toxic in that situation. So it's really important that when we sacrifice, that we have something to sacrifice. Number one, right there. And I calling this out because I know people who come from a very sacrificial place, and what happens is they run out of juice and they crash and they burn, and then they get mad at their spouse. So it's important when we're sacrificing that we've got the energy to give, that we make sure that we're rested and that we've eaten and that we've done, as introverts, whatever we need to do to feel confident and secure, so that when we walk into a less than comfortable situation, we're prepared for it. Also, I can't help but call out that when I think about, you might look, I like to phrase, this is the best way I can phrase this. There's one, I used to say I'm a follower of Jesus, but now I like to say I model my life after the way this man lived his life.
Yeah.
All right. And something I know from reading about him and talking to other people who model their lives after this man is that he was really ambivalent about that sacrifice, right? And he needed to know that it was necessary and that it was on mission and purpose for him to do it, right? Like there's this whole, the night before he's saying, hey, Dad, do I really have to do this?
I want to do this.
And he gets it, that the only way he can fulfill his personal sense of purpose and mission is to give himself up. And so he walks into it 100% willing, ready, willing, and able. And I think part of love in action is also, we need to, number one, our batteries need to be charged. So he charges battery by, having interaction with his father, and charges battery in that way. And then number two, we need to be on purpose or on mission. So you're 100, when you go into those parties, you're 100% on purpose and mission, because your purpose and mission in relationship to your wife is crystal clear, and perhaps even the people who are attending. And so sacrifice is dangerous when one of those two things or both of those two things are missing.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, look, one of the coolest stories about Jesus is when he did the miracle that fed the 5,000.
I'm a water and wine guy myself, but go on.
Yeah, that's a good one too. I wish they would be combined. You would have had good fish, bread, and wine.
Yeah, there you go. Like, what was up with that? They didn't have enough water.
That's a party right there.
They did not have those big jars is the problem. They were heavy, so they couldn't carry it out to the mountain. Anyway.
But what was cool is that before he does the miracle, as people press in, they're wanting to hear him teach. He goes out in a boat pushes away so that he could recharge.
Yeah, so he can get some room.
I'm totally praying, gets recharged, does the miracle. What I love is that there were 12 baskets full of bread and fish left over. There just happened to be 12 disciples. So each disciple got their own bread.
It's their own basket. Woohoo!
Which is that idea that God wants our hearts full of love and overflowing. And then what does he do? He loads them up on a boat, and sends the disciples on, and he goes up into the hills to spend more time
Mhm.
recharging in prayer so that he can go and do more ministry. So you're absolutely right. If we're not figuring out, well, I always tell people, if you want to, if you have to have something to give, to sacrifice, or to serve, and I always tell people, I think it's two things. You've got to figure out in your life what gives you rest, which you talked about. So figure out what gives you rest that's going to recharge you, but also figure out what gives you life. And
Mm.
that's that passion that you talked about.
Yeah.
And maybe that's following, passion comes from following those dreams and callings and things that just excites you. But it can also, I live in Colorado in the mountains. I hate the
Yeah, I
cold
got mountain
weather
envy,
here.
brother. I got
Yeah, but
mountain
I
envy.
love
So
it during the summer to where we can go fishing. I mean, man, when I'm in a stream listening to the water and fishing, that just gives me life. So you've got to figure out in your life what gives you rest and what brings your heart alive.
So let me just footnote this. If you are listening to this and this sounded a little religious to you, I'm going to encourage you just to take the values and principles that resonate with you. Like we've all got our own slant on life, and I honor and respect yours. And also, though, I think, Greg, you've got so much to offer. How can people find you and find the work that you and your wife do?
Yeah, if you come to focusonthefamily.com, well, we've got all kinds of tools and articles and programs to help strengthen marriages and to strengthen parents as well as relationships.
Cool. And your focus on the family is open to everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, my passion is to help people have great marriages, great relationships, and we've spent a lot of time developing good content to do that based on our 30-year marriage, based on our 30 years of working with couples. And we've got a marriage intensive program called Hope Restored. It's kind of a marriage ER, and we've seen over 10,000 couples through that, about an
Amazing.
80% success rate. So we'd love to help in any way.
Amazing. I love the work that you're doing. And I love that you're doing it together. And I'm so grateful to have you here on the show. The question I ask everyone at the end of the show, and sadly we are at the end, is what's the legacy you'd like to leave behind?
Yeah, I want people to know that I was passionate about my faith, that I was a person that pursued modeling my life after Christ, like you talked about. But then I loved my wife well till the day I died, and I loved my kids with all my heart. And I hope that they look back and go, man, my dad loved well. And if that's how people remember me, that I love Jesus well and love my wife and kids well, and I that's the legacy I hope to leave.
Love that. And y'all, let me just reemphasize this, right? The more that we find people who have lived or are living in a way that we want to, right? The more we have models for
Mhm.
how we want to live our lives, the next step is to elicit strategies, right? What are the
Right.
strategies they use to live that way? And so whoever you're using as a model, and it might be a spiritual model, it might be someone who's alive, it might be somebody who's dead. You look for what is it they're accomplishing that I honor and respect and want to be like, and then look for the strategies, right? So it's more rather than getting stuck on other people's who's, like Greg and I share a who. Think about what's your who, what are they accomplishing that resonates with you, and what is the strategy you can take from that?
Right.
Greg, it has been, but I just got to say, there are not a lot of who's that I can see that I would want besides the guy that you and I have been talking about. I
Yeah.
just got to say that, wow. I mean, the whole world is so different as a result. And my wife is fond of pointing out that some of the worst wars in history were religiously driven. And I want to be really clear: we're not talking religion here. We're talking about spirituality.
Right.
Religion, anything where people get organized together and funnel money and power into one central source is
Yeah.
always a risky venture. We're talking about spirituality here. So, just like keep that in mind. They're not always the same thing.
That's right.
All right. I'm not even sure where this stuff is coming from, Greg. So great to have you on the show. I sincerely hope that we will speak again.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me.